I just was making a list of a whole bunch of movies that were made for a fairly low budget and then managed to make a ton of money, and or just movies in general that were made for a very low budget. But it's interesting to think about them because they're all a little different here. But for reference sake, Primer, according to this, costs according to IMDb
Like
anyway,
7,000.
$7,000 is what they claim, um, and it made $545,000. Another, let me give you another example that's not super huge. Let's start with what Gil said. So the following, um, which
Nolan. Yeah.
we've mentioned on this podcast before, is Christopher Nolan's first film, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
First
Definitely
feature.
breakthrough. Yeah.
First
Oh,
feature
yeah.
film, at least. Yeah, um,
Got his foot
and
in the door.
yeah, that was made for $6,000, and it made $49,000. So not super successful by by
Mm.
these standards. Obviously, in terms of comparing budget to what it made, it was extremely successful because most major movies big budget studio films don't do more than like double their budget usually, or if they do, that's great, but they don't always
Mhm.
do that. um, but still not nearly as much as something like Primer did. And then of course Pi made a lot more money. Now granted, Pi cost 10 times as much to make. It was $60,000 to make, but it claims to have made 3.2 million. And if you've never seen Pi, that's Darren Aronofsky's first feature film that kind of was made him a
Yeah.
breakout star.
Oh yeah, I didn't
Um,
realize it was that expensive. I forgot that.
but that's still not that expensive, but that's and there those are both black and white films. Um,
I I actually have a serious story about shooting on black and white reversal that might become relevant. So
oh, okay.
yeah,
Um,
but anyway,
the other black and white movie that everybody always talks about, of course, is is Kevin Smith's first film, Clerks. That was supposedly $27,000 to make, and it made $3.1 million.
Mm.
So pretty much half the cost of Pi and about the same take. So both of those are pretty successful, I would say. Um, and then when you move down from there, you start getting into the big stuff. Um, Bigger budgets, but still way more successful. Also, like one of the ones people talk about a lot is Halloween, the original Halloween, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, that was made for $325,000, which for an indie film is, I mean that's pretty much what you'd expect for a feature, I guess. I guess it kind
Uh,
of depends on a lot of factors, but
that was in the late 70s, though,
no,
right?
I know, yeah. So that
Yeah.
is something
So
to
That's
take in mind.
it's like a
Definitely something
two
to think
million
about.
dollar movie now.
But yeah, and today $2 million movie is like a nothing budget for a feature. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but it made 47 million in the 70s, so that's pretty successful,
yeah.
obviously. And you'll notice the trend of horror films being like that because they can be made for nothing and they can make a lot of money. Um, the one everybody always talks about, of course, Napoleon Dynamite. Um, Pretty well, whatever. So that one, $400,000, and obviously not made in the 70s. That was what, about 15 years ago or so, something like that.
Yeah.
16, 17 years, I don't know, whatever. Anyway,
Yeah,
that,
well, Tom Cruise still isn't as good of an actor. So
huh?
Napoleon Dynamite,
Oh yeah. Um,
season 9.
uh, Made 4.6 million dollars. Or sorry, 46 million. I'm
46
sorry.
million.
Yeah. So same amount as Halloween. But anyway, this is where it gets ridiculous. These two movies are, in my opinion, trash, but whatever. They need to be mentioned at least. the whole found footage garbage. You can make the movie for nothing. But
Yeah.
paranormal, the first Paranormal Activity film movie, whatever's, was made for $15,000, according
Mhm.
to IMDb. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but raked in 193 million.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it says that they added a new ending for the theatrical release, and the ending cost 200,000 more. But still,
wow.
that's pretty cheap.
Well, that's actually a point I was just about to get into when I finish this. But the last one I wanted to mention, of course, is the granddaddy of them all, the terrible film, The Blair Witch Project. Is $60,000 to create and $248 million in. Yeah, it was what it got. So that's pretty awesome for them. Um,
I personally like that movie, but
I
I
can't
understand it's very
stand it.
controversial because they essentially lied that it might be actual
Well,
footage that was filmed.
that's just good marketing. I didn't mind the
Yeah.
lie. For me, I started watching it and everybody was saying it was so good, and then I finally put it on, and I was like, I didn't know it was like a found footage thing. So I'm like watching the beginning of it, and I was like, wait, so, and by the way, I'm watching it on HBO. So on HBO, a lot of times when there's a big movie out and stuff, there's like
Mhm.
documentaries and stuff. Like one of them I remember was like when that George Clooney movie, The Perfect Storm, came out. Like when right before the movie was on HBO, there was like a documentary about the real life thing that happened. You know, so I see Blair Witch Project come on one day, and I'm like, oh, this is that movie I wanted to see, and I clicked on it and started watching it, and it's like, when I say clicked on, obviously I mean the channel because this was back then. But I start watching it and I go, what the heck? This isn't even a movie. What is this? Like a documentary about the movie? Then I kept watching it. And I was like, oh, this is how this movie is. This is awful. And I kept watching and kept watching. And I was like, okay, so I'm now like 45 minutes into this movie and I'm just watching people yell at each other about a map and they're like lost in the woods. And I'm like, this is so stupid. There isn't any drama. I want them all to die. I don't want any of these characters to succeed. I don't know what's going on. And it gets to the end. There's kind of a freaky moment, and I'm just like, okay, that was a huge waste of my time. But anyway, I don't want to talk trash. It's
Well,
just,
you really came into that like with the wrong expectations.
I guess, I don't know. I just wanted to see a movie, but and I didn't really feel like I got one.
You
But
have a pretty narrow definition of a movie back then. Yeah.
I could, I think I could take a camcorder and a couple of like, a couple of the like actors that have acted for us for free, and we could go out and like into the woods and make a more compelling movie than that.
I don't believe that. I mean, that's what everybody says about the found footage movies, but go and make one. They're very rare. Like the ones that are made cheaply, it's not easy to make. I mean, Paranormal Activity kind of revived it. The fact that it was an Israeli guy, uh,
I didn't
that
know that.
it was able to like pull that off again. And he obviously couldn't. He wasn't able to duplicate it. None of these people actually, I don't think, had much of a career after maybe producing and stuff. But it's because it's tough. It's even they couldn't duplicate it to some degree. But whatever, like whatever confluence of events and setup that just really worked for that specific thing. I definitely like Blair Witch more than Paranormal Activity. I saw both because I there was a hype about both of them, so I give them both a shot during their time. And yeah, I think Blair Witch was just really scary. It was really effective, and I don't like scary movies, and I actually specifically went for it because it was like, oh, this is different. It's a found footage versus just a normal scary movie, which I was not a big fan of. So to me, it was unique. But yeah, I think if you come at the wrong expectations, I totally get it. Makes sense.
Well, just to defend myself here, let me just say that when I made my statement right now, I'm not saying I could take a camera and a few actors and crank out a little script and then crank out a feature length movie and that it's going to be more successful than this. Otherwise, I would have done that already. I just mean to say that I think the movie, The Blair Witch Project, is not even worth watching. I think it's complete garbage. Now, whether it was obviously very successful, people liked it for some reason, the word of mouth got out that it was terrifying. Everybody who likes horror movies went in droves to go see it. And pretty much the same thing happened with Paranormal Activity, to some extent. And but I mean, just to say this, like, I've seen other found footage movies, which I don't particularly care for, that whole fad premise, whatever. But I've seen a couple that I actually thought were worth watching. There were some that I thought were decent. They're not, great movies or anything, but leaps and bounds better than both of those movies. Which I did see Paranormal Activity in theaters because I could see it for free at the time when it came out. I was working at a movie theater, but yeah, I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't think either one of them are really very good. But they definitely they managed to capture the audience's attention and everything, because they made a crap load of money.
No, not just audience. I mean, it's got 86% on Rotten Tomatoes and 7.7 on IMDb. So it's not as if like just the audience like went for the marketing. I just think that it was unique for what it did. It had multiple. They mixed the digital with the film because they were making a movie, but then all the camcorders. It approached horror in a different way, and at the time it was unique. But I'm sure by now it's one of those things. Like it's
I wanted to mention this real quickly because I kind of never finished, or kind of forgot to mention it when I was listing all those movies at the beginning, the one that we had talked about. So that as I listed them, I was kind of listing them in order of how successful they were in terms of low budget versus how much they made, kind of thing. But there's another aspect of that that's worth mentioning, is that, well, two aspects that are worth mentioning. One is, how good are these movies? I mean, maybe, stuff like El Mariachi and Clerks were made for, well, let's say Primer. Also, Primer, El Mariachi, and Clerks were all made for less than $30,000 and made, $500,000, $2 million, and $3 million respectively. But in terms of all these movies I just listed, it's like what we said, what are the best movies out of all those? Because obviously those two I mentioned at the end, Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch Project, made almost hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. But I don't think that they're nearly as good as some of these other movies. Obviously Gil said he liked them better than me, but it's fine. The only reason I'm bringing this up is to say that obviously I started all this by mentioning Following, which is by far the least successful out of everything on that list. But I think it's the best movie.
And at the time, maybe it didn't do as much business, but and Nolan famously, I think, said, because it wasn't accepted to Sundance, but it got accepted to other festivals, and it did fine, and it still got him what he needed to get the funding for Memento. Yeah. And so he famously said, like, Sundance is not the only festival out there. It's saying that they're kind of snobbish and they kind of go for like a specific kind of thing. And Following was a sort of a traditional, trying to be a traditional movie, and mostly succeeded at that. It was just like a low budget version of it, but it was not trying to be a highbrow, artsy kind of movie, which, by the way, I don't think Primer is an artsy movie. No. I just think it's just very high concept, and it's very, very smart. But Following is quite complex. It's very it's not a simple plot, and then the time sequencing and everything, all that stuff. I'm surprised that a movie like that didn't make it into Sundance.
Me too.
But I guess the point I was trying to make is that obviously because it's Nolan, I'm sure it had a second life on video and streaming. I'm sure that by now more people have watched it than Primer and Pi combined. I mean,